Welcome to another edition of the 007 Files. I'm Bill Koenig, along with my co-hosts, Javi Trujillo and David Lee. Today, we're talking to a guest who wears many hats. He is an author, he is a podcaster, and the reason we have him on this show is the president of the Ian Fleming Foundation, and we're going to get into what that group does. And his name is Alan J. Porter. Alan, would you like to introduce yourself?
I think you pretty much just did there, Bill. But yes, thank you. I am a writer, written 2 books around James Bond. And Javi and I were just actually reminiscing before we came on about when he came to one of my book signings at one of our favorite bookstores. So done 2 books on James Bond, just about to wrap up a 3rd. Manuscript is due at the end of June, so I've got another month and a bit to go to finish writing it. And I also write on a whole bunch of other non-fiction, pop culture stuff, civil aviation history as well. And I also do some fiction work, mainly short stories and novellas, high adventure, historical fiction, short stories and novellas, as well as the sort of pop culture non-fiction stuff. And podcasting, as you mentioned that, I am involved with 3 podcasts. I have a podcast on the early days of the Beatles called Before They Were Beatles. My wife and I have a podcast on Agatha Christie called Chronological Christie. And I co-host the On Her Majesty's Secret Podcast Network, which you may have guessed is actually a James Bond podcast network. So that's pretty much my life these days. Plus, of course, as you just mentioned, the Ian Fleming Foundation is a large part of what I do these days as well.
Didn't you say you were retired?
Technically, yes.
He's retired from the corporate world.
Yeah, I retired from the corporate world at the end of last year, yes. So I'm one of those people when now I'm retired, I wonder how the hell I had time for a day job.
Yeah. Well, let's break the ice with a little bit about the history of the Ian Fleming Foundation. It's one of those groups, it's prominent in some circles, but I get the sense not everyone knows a whole lot about it. So I know it was founded in 1992. There were 3 founders, Michael Van Blercom, John Cork, and Doug Redenius. But anytime you have an organization that's gone on that long, there's bound to be change, and there's been some changes, including you becoming the president, succeeding Mike, I believe.
Right, yes.
So walk us through that. What is the foundation? What is its mission statement?
We've actually gone through a period of change. It's a new era for James Bond in the last 12 months. It's also become a new era for the foundation. As of the last 12 months, our mission has really been focused going forward. Well, let me explain what we are. First, we're a US-based nonprofit organization. And our focus and mission is to empower the next generation of readers, writers, and filmmakers by really leveraging the legacy of Ian Fleming and James Bond. So what does that mean in practice? What we do is we have a large rare manuscripts and books collection at the University of Illinois. We also have a scholarship program with the University of Illinois Media School, where so far we've given out over the years 18 scholarships to students who are doing work in the media studies area. And we're looking to expand that and open that up starting later this year with the next input of students and actually making it easier to get a grant. And we actually also just this year launched a Teen Literacy Award, which goes to organizations and schools within areas that have some connection to Ian Fleming and James Bond to basically broaden people's access and students' access to writing schools, writing programs and so forth. Our first award went to the State University in New York, in upstate New York, in the Adirondacks, which, if you've read The Spy Who Loved Me, know has a very strong James Bond connection. And obviously also Fleming, because Fleming was on site and did a lot of research there. So that they have actually used that to fund their visiting writers program. And they just had the great American writer William Kennedy come in and do a session for the students there. And that was funded through the grant that the Ian Fleming Foundation gave them. So we are really looking to do that. And of course, the one thing that the folks who do know about the Ian Fleming Foundation probably know us because we own the world's largest collection of screen-used James Bond vehicles. We have around 40 vehicles and props. And the purpose of those is that we rescue, restore, conserve those, bring them up to museum quality, and they then go out and are leased out to exhibits, museums, a couple of corporate events, and any income that we generate from those goes back into the programs for the educational programs and scholarships and so forth. So we're really focused going forward on Fleming and leveraging Fleming's legacy in a way that we can bring in a whole new generation of people and get them interested in literature, filmmaking, and so forth. So it was a fairly rambling answer to your question there, Bill, but that's what we do. We're really focused on really empowering that next generation of readers, writers, and filmmakers by leveraging the great legacy of Ian Fleming, and of course, Bond comes along with that.
Well, I sense there's an effort by the foundation to kind of get the word out more than maybe it did in the past. Alan, you recently spoke, was it the Studebaker Museum in South Bend, Indiana?
Yes, we actually were lucky enough to launch. The Studebaker Museum has 2 of our vehicles on display currently, but they also have a annual educational program of visiting lectures. And I was honored enough to actually launch that this year and come in and do a lecture on the foundation, and with it being the car museum, talk about the stories behind some of the restoration projects we've done. Because one of the cool things about the vehicles is not just the vehicles themselves, but the stories behind them, where they were found, and the roles they had in the movies, and sort of pulled back a curtain a bit on the movie magic of how vehicles are used, what happened to them after the movie, and then where they were found and the restoration processes. But we've also done, as you said, we are really opening up the foundation connection with the larger Bond community and the larger literacy community as well. We're really building a greater social media presence and getting out there and getting the word out. I just mentioned the William Kennedy thing. Our Vice President, Frida Toth, actually did the introduction to that William Kennedy event at the University in New York. So really starting to spread the word around what the foundation does.
Well, and Frida was an early guest on this podcast in the fall of 2024. And I follow her on social media. I've seen her post photos of her doing speeches at various events.
Yes, definitely.
Let me ask you this. Why did the foundation have a relatively low profile? I mean, you can debate that, but, it does seem like Bond fans I've encountered, they've heard of it, but they're not quite sure what it does. Why is that, and why do you feel the need to change that?
I'm going to answer the second part of that first. So, as you mentioned, one of the founders was John Cork, who many people know if they've put in their DVD things and gone to the special features on a Bond DVD, you'll see, virtually every special feature is produced by John Cork or written by John Cork, and of course he's written. So he's been very much involved in the thing. And probably about 2 years ago, we were having a conversation, and one of the other guys in the foundation said to John, "Have you ever heard of Founders Syndrome?" And
I know who you're talking about, but go ahead.
Yeah. Because John tells this story quite a lot, and John was like, no. And so he read up on it, and he's like, oh, that's us. And founder syndrome basically is that, when you found something, you get so attached to it, and it sort of becomes, it doesn't sort of grow. It just stays that way. And to be honest, you said there was 3 founders, and those 3 founders, all great guys, but had very separate sort of interests in the area. Mike was very much around building the manuscripts library. John, in the early days, was very much, he wrote and edited and produced the GoldenEye magazine for a long time. And then his workload grew and he sort of stepped away for a while and then came back a couple of years ago. Doug was very much the person around the vehicles. All great guys, but they sort of acted a little independently. I hope they don't mind me saying that. And so the foundation sort of became a little bit splintered in what it did and how it presented itself. And when Mike decided to retire early, and then Doug stepped away for whatever his reasons, he decided to step away. It became very much, this was actually a good opportunity to sort of start actually acting like what we are, a 501c nonprofit organization. So we had a look at what we were doing, and it's like, okay, we needed to pull things back together and really set up and start acting like a corporation, which is weird since I just retired from the corporate world. And what am I now doing is actually trying to pull this organization together to act like a corporation. But to start doing that and actually start talking to each other and communicating with each other and bringing things together. So we had a common vision, and everything that we did would drive that one common vision rather than it being sort of three separate activities. So, if people knew about it, it's probably because they interacted with one of those three rather than the Fleming Foundation as a whole. So, one of the things we've been really pushing is to pull the foundation together as and act as one organization with a shared vision. It's been a very interesting coming up for 12 months since we did that. And we've still got a long way to go. We're still figuring a lot of things out operationally and behind the scenes, and with some of the paperwork and some of this, all the stuff that comes with being a nonprofit in the US. But we're getting there. And like I said, one of the key things to do is to do things like this, is to get out and talk about the foundation and spread the word.
David and Javi, go ahead.
Yeah, it's been 1995 when GoldenEye branded Bond as sexist, misogynist dinosaur and a relic of the Cold War. And we've been in a bit of a lull when it comes to the big screen adventures, but we're on the precipice of like a new era of Bond, with now 2 novels coming out this year set in the current day. We have a video game, First Light, coming out 2 months. They're working on the new movie. And there's been a bit of something in the air about, the younger generation hasn't embraced Bond in ways that others have. How does the foundation, going forward into this new era, how do they plan on getting out there and getting reaching that younger audience? And, what do you have to be a Fleming or Bond fan to apply for the scholarships? No, that's actually one of the areas that we're opening up. Like I said, we're starting to open it up. Same with the Teen Literacy Grant Fund. Here's a bunch of money to help with student writing programs. It wasn't, this has to be Fleming orientated, or this has to be Bond. It's like, here's money, you go do with it what you want. But when you do an event, make sure that people know it's coming from the Ian Fleming Foundation. So we really want to open up the philanthropic side of the organization and make people aware of that, and not tie them to Fleming and Bond. The great thing about Fleming and Bond is it opens so many doors. You get into a conversation and you start saying this, depending on who you're talking to, this is connected to Ian Fleming, or this is a James Bond thing. And there's that instant brand recognition. I mean, we're lucky we're being able to leverage one of the biggest brands in the world. So that helps. In terms of bringing in the younger folks, that's a good question. I think one of the ways we want to do it is partly by this emphasis on the educational programs, college level educational programs, but actually also opening up the foundation itself. So, it used to be that the only way you could sort of really get involved was by invitation only. We don't do that now. We are open to volunteers. We've got literally on our website, we've now got a form you can fill in and say, hey, I want to volunteer and here are my skills. As an organization moving into the 21st century, there's certain skill levels that younger people have got that we don't have. So we're looking for people who can help us with social media, video, things, that sort of thing. And, we've started to invite more people to come to events and see things and speak at more events where hopefully we'll start engaging with some of those younger people. It's not going to happen overnight. It's going to take it's going to be a generational shift. As you said, there's a new video game coming out. Whether it'll have the same effect that GoldenEye did, I hope so.
When you talk to Bond fans now, there is definitely 2 generations of Bond fans. There is there's the older original fans, if you like, and then there's the GoldenEye generation. I'm hoping that the next one maybe will do the same thing and bringing in a whole bunch of people who love the video game and then go out and find out about James Bond and Ian Fleming. But I will say one of the great things is just having the vehicles out at events. Like I say, we just did a corporate event for, well, it's not a secret because it was all over the internet, for Macallan Whiskey in LA, where we provided a couple of vehicles. They did a launch of a Diamonds Are Forever 55th anniversary whiskey. That event was packed with social media influencers. We had a couple of vehicles there. One of the guys from the foundation was there to talk about the vehicles, talk about what we do, so forth. So again, very early days, but getting into these sort of events where we can help spread the word, not just about James Bond, but about what the foundation does as well. It's part of the game plan. But there's no magic answer to bringing in younger folks other than actually getting out in front of the younger people and letting them know we exist and letting them know that we're open and we're there to help them if they've got any interest in the creative arts around writing and filmmaking.
The vehicles are arguably the sexiest part of the foundation.
Yes, that's true. I would never argue with that point.
And for many years, the vehicles had been stored in Illinois, maybe 90 minutes south of Chicago. Then last year, you relocated to another location, which I know they don't want to be that specific. But what can you say publicly about that? Why was the decision made to relocate? And you can probably talk more about this. What was involved? That's a big job. I don't know the precise number of vehicles, but it's quite a few.
Yeah, so we have 40 vehicles all told. We've never, or very rarely, needed to house all 40 vehicles. We've been very lucky. There's always been vehicles out on the road. Thing is, that was partly because a lot of the foundation's income came from the Bond in Motion exhibits, which were basically Eon production shows. They set them up, managed them, and well, they had some vehicles. They didn't have that many, surprisingly. So if they had holes in the exhibits, they needed to fill in. We backfilled in. So quite often, those Bond in Motion exhibits, 12 to 15 of the vehicles would be Ian Fleming Foundation vehicles. That was a very steady income, and it also kept those vehicles on the road. But with Eon pulling out, Bond in Motion stopping, we had to look hard and say, well, what would happen if all the vehicles came back? And the point was where we'd been for the last 8 years, could not accommodate that what if. So we needed to find a bigger space, basically. And where we were, the lease was coming up, and it was a good opportunity to move somewhere that actually gave us more space. So we could, I hope we never get to the point. I'd love to get to the point where that new warehouse is empty and everything's out. But we needed space at what if everything comes back. And we've actually, as you know, Bill, because you were just there, got some new bigger items too. So we needed more space. As for the move, yes, we did the move over 3 weeks. Volunteers were great. Basically came in over odd weekends, helped pack everything up. It's amazing what you accumulate being 8 years in one space. If you've ever moved house, you know that. So there was a question of moving stuff. Moving stuff was the biggest stuff we moved was we have the front half of Goldfinger's Lockheed Jetstar. So getting that onto an 18-wheeler semi-truck was interesting, but if you want to know, you can fit the front half of a Lockheed Jetstar in an 18-wheeler semi. Only just, but you can. The other fun one was the Hiller helicopter from Russia with Love. We got that on a low loader. We got that okay, but when we got to the new facility, we found it couldn't, even though we'd measured everything, it didn't quite fit through the doors. So we had to pay a little bit of helicopter Jenga to get it in. Which was fun. And the other big one really is, and this is my fault because I sort of got it for the foundation several years ago, was the excavator, the Caterpillar excavator from Skyfall, which used to fit into the old location, but actually won't go through the doors of the new location. So it now is actually in a separate facility a couple of miles away. Getting the big stuff, we actually also took the opportunity to get one of the vehicles that we've been talking about having professionally restored for a long time. We actually managed to coordinate that left our old location and went straight down to a specialist restoration shop in Texas. So again, we didn't have to move that one. But there was a lot of moving the smaller stuff in the back of people's cars and then renting low loaders and forklifts and 18-wheelers and convoying. It was a bit like the old Chris Christopherson movie. We had a little convoy going across the 2 hours between the two locations over a 2 to 3 week period. Yeah, it was fun. It was exhausting. It was a lot of hard work and never want to do it again.
If you do run out of space ever, I'll volunteer to look after a vehicle or two for you.
Yeah, I've said that where I now live in a condo and I have a spare parking space in the garage down underneath the condo. And I kept saying, Tracy's Mercury Cougar, if we can't get that in, I've got this parking space underneath my condo.
Well, real quick, Alan mentioned this, the Goldfinger jet. It's not the complete jet. It's like the cockpit and a passenger compartment. There's no wings, there's no tail, etc. But the cockpit has been meticulously restored, a company brought in the kind of, instrument controls that match the plane, the original plane. And I did want to ask you about this, was when I got home after having seen it for the first time, I queued up Goldfinger and watched the scenes where the plane, either the Auric plane or the US plane, since the same jet doubled for both. But when I looked inside the restored jet, it's like, I'm guessing the scenes in the inside of the plane with Sean Connery and Honor Blackman are probably a set, because looking like that's not big enough to accommodate 1964 motion picture cameras.
No, that plane's like the TARDIS. It's bigger on the inside than it is on the outside from a movie perspective. Yes,
but it is the same plane where Connery gets out first, Honor Blackman gets out second, and she pulls a gun on him and so on and so forth. It's just, but I know it's been years in the rehab and it was found in a junkyard or scrapyard, whatever you want to call it. How much work was involved?
That's probably about 3 years worth of work from a dedicated team. So yes, to Bill's point, what we have is the actual airframe from basically the front of the wing box forward. It was found in a scrapyard in, I got to get this right, Kansas, I believe, an aviation scrapyard. And it was actually the complete aircraft, or the complete fuselage. It wasn't the wing, but it was the complete fuselage. But the back end was in, what we got was in a terrible state, but the back end was in even worse. So two things. First off, we didn't tell the junkyard what they had. We didn't want to tell them it was the Goldfinger jet, because if we did, the price would have gone up. So basically, we said we were a bunch of guys. One of our friends had piloted that plane and he was retiring, and we wanted to get it and basically dress it up as a retirement present. And what we really wanted was the cockpit, and obviously the door that Connery and Honor Blackman, we wanted that part. And so the junkyard basically went back a little bit further and cut it from the wing box forward. So we have that. And as you said, when we were doing the restoration, because it was terrible, there was weeds growing up through it. And the company that runs the scrapyard, basically, when they get a plane, one of the first things they do is rip all the instruments out, because they can sell those separately for quite a bit of money. So basically, the cockpit area had been completely smashed and vandalized as they just literally ripped everything out. So one of the things was tracing and refurbing the cockpit. So as one of our volunteers likes to say, we spent a lot of money on a bunch of instruments that don't work but look very pretty. And then the interior, as you said, was a set. So it was like, what do we do with the interior? Do we try and recreate it? Well, if you try and recreate it, it's not going to fit. So what we did was basically find photos and schematics of what a corporate luxury jet of the time, how that was fitted, and found the right pieces to go in there to sort of bring it up to what a corporate jet star in 1965, what the actual jet would have looked like, as opposed to the set, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. Makes sense. Yeah. Also, one scene cannot be unseen. So when I was rewatching those Goldfinger recently, there's a logo on the tail. So if you really know what you're looking for, you can see it's the same plane.
Yeah.
And it's obviously the same plane anyway, but
yeah. And as Bill knows, because I know he's helped move it, we have the filming model for the Goldfinger jet, which is, I don't know, probably about, this is very visual, folks, for a podcast, I don't know, a couple of feet long, but it's painted like the main jet itself. It's painted on one side as Goldfinger's jet and painted on the other side as the presidential jet. So when it's flying, I can't remember which way it is. I think it's when it's flying right to left, it's Goldfinger's jet, and when it's flying left to right, it's the presidential jet.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
Yeah.
Is part of the restoration, is the hope just to have it there for display for the plane? Or is it being restored with the purpose of having others walk through that section to kind of get a feel of what it would be like to be?
Yeah, eventually we'd like to get it out on the road and out to exhibits, and I don't know, maybe even things like Comic Cons and stuff where people can, come through. But I will say the trailer it's on at the moment is not designed for long distance travel. So we've got to figure a few logistical things out. But yeah, eventually we've had one aerospace museum express some interest. It's not gone anywhere yet, but they've expressed some interest. And we'd like to eventually get it out on the road as another. And to be honest, I've been totally thinking one of the things I want to do with that collection is make sure that everything in the collection is generating revenue for the foundation. So we are taking a hard look at what's in the collection and saying, is this something that some of the stuff is, constantly on the road. The Lotus submarine is no problem. I mean, that generates a lot of revenue. But looking at some things like the Caterpillar and like, what can we do to actually make this into a revenue generating asset? It's cool to have it, but does it actually help the foundation, or is it just costing us money to store it? And we want to make sure that everything we've got has the ability to generate revenue to help us drive those scholarships and grants and stuff, because we're planning more than we currently have. We're planning to extend the grant program too. So we need the vehicles to be actual, hate to sound corporate, but we need them to be revenue generating assets.
I used to be a somewhat regular attendee at what they called the work weekends. Twice a year, volunteers come in and they rehab the vehicles. Now, to be honest, I have to admit, I'm not the most mechanically inclined. Anyway, this year, I attended the spring work weekend. It was the first time in 7 years. So I was kind of stunned, that airplane restoration in particular. I was aware of it, but I had not seen it. So it's very impressive.
Thank you.
But one year when I was a regular, I was shown the foundation had got its hands on the Mustang as driven by Bond. It appears to be driven by Sean Connery. I suspect a stuntman drove it a lot. But anyway, from Diamonds Are Forever. And it was in terrible shape. They had not begun the restoration yet. And I don't know what the status is on that, but describe a bit about when you get your hands on some of these vehicles, they're in bad shape, or at least not very good shape.
Actually, when I was talking about a vehicle going in for a professional restoration, that's the one. The Mustang is actually now down with a company down in Texas who specialize not just in Mustang restoration, but in Mustang Mach 1 restoration. That's all they do. It has been literally stripped back to the bare chassis and rebuilt. We did actually have a note from the guy who runs the shop about a week ago, and they'd spent 450 hours just on the metal work rebuild. And he said, I will tell you, if this wasn't the vehicle it was, we would have scrapped it.
Wow.
So the story behind that one is after it finished filming, I don't know how it ended up in LA, obviously, for some pickup shots and filming. And then I don't know how, but it ended up in San Francisco when it sat in a storage unit for about 20 years. And a guy in Texas who was doing another Mach 1 build bought it basically as a spares mule for the other project he was working on. Didn't know what it was. But then when he ran the VIN number through some movie vehicle database, it popped up that it was potentially a Diamonds Are Forever car. And then we acquired it, and then we worked with this third-party Mach 1 specialist who came in and did a whole bunch of investigation, and it was like, yes, this is definitely one of the hero cars from Diamonds. So, but you're right. The Kenworth truck from License to Kill is another one that you didn't see, Bill, but is parts up where the Caterpillar is. That's in terrible condition because after the movie, those trucks went back to Kenworth, and Kenworth basically gave it to a fire training school in Portland, Oregon, where it was put on its side and doused with water every day for 18 years to train firemen how to rescue people from an overturned 18-wheeler. So, and this is the one that went up on two wheels. So, often these things are in terrible condition, and it's just a question of, is it something that we're going to tackle? Is it something we need to bring in third-party people? The truck, ideally, I'd like to find a truck restoration company, particularly one of these guys that has these car restoration programs. If we can find one who's willing to take on a project like that, we'd love to do that. I think that one's a little outside our realm. We were lucky with the aircraft. We have professional aviation mechanics in the foundation. We have pilots in the foundation. We have people who know the aerospace, who come out of the aerospace industry and know that industry. So we were able to really work that one ourselves. So, sometimes we do it ourselves, sometimes using the great assets that we got among the volunteers. And there's other times it's like, can we find a third party? There was no way we could have tackled the Mustang and got it back to showroom condition ourselves because it was too far gone.
Let me give a shout out to one of them. I believe he has title of vice president. His name is Colin Clark. His day job is working for United Airlines. And he is like the most mechanically inclined person I've ever met. And I'm just, again, I'm a klutz when it comes to mechanics, so I'm in awe of him. So
yeah, Colin now runs our properties group committee that runs is sort of charged with looking after the care and restoration of the vehicles and looking after them. And he's an amazing guy. Yeah, he's built a great team.
I'd like to hear more about, there's a Facebook post I saw a day ago about becoming a friend of the Ian Fleming Foundation.
Yeah.
Tell us about that.
So this is a new campaign that we're just launched, a new program we're just launching. It's sort of a soft launch at the moment, just to see if there's interest. So traditionally, like I say, a lot of our income came from bond in motion and things like that. That's gone. So we're really having to pivot more towards getting our funding from donations. We've always had donations to a level, but we've never really pushed that. We're trying to move to the fact where 60% of our income comes from donations and 40% from the vehicles. So one of the reasons that, we want to give people a reason to donate. Now, currently you can donate through the website, but that's like a one-off donation. And you can say, hey, I want this money to go to the general fund, or I want it to go to the preservation fund, or I want it to go to the Teen Writers Award or whatever. But it's like a one-off thing. And what we wanted to do was set up a program where people can actually start to build an ongoing relationship with the foundation. So to an extent, it's like a membership program, but because we're a 501c nonprofit, we're not allowed to have members, but we are allowed to have friends. So it's sort of like a membership program where instead of people feeling that they have to make a significant one-off donation, if you can afford, $007 a month to become a friend of the foundation, that do. So we've got like a monthly subscription level, a annual subscription level, or you can still do one-offs. There will be, we're looking at setting up, depending on those donation levels, different levels of, don't want to say perks, things. We've got some ideas around merchandise and swag that would go with different levels, and different levels of access to, maybe if you're at the top level, you get a guided tour of the workshop and things like that. Or you get discounts on things that are coming up or whatever. We're looking at potentially resurrecting Goldeneye magazine, and maybe you get, a level of subscription to that or something like that. We're still figuring that out. Partly we're sort of waiting on signing some contracts for the people who do the fulfillment. There's also a couple of Fleming quotes that we want to put on the merch. So we're waiting on clearance from Ian Fleming Publications as to whether we can put those quotes on the merchandise. But what we wanted to do is, before we really committed to doing it, was to do a soft launch to see if there was actually interest from folks in becoming a friend of the foundation. So we did a soft launch on that just over a week ago. And so far, it's actually getting quite a bit of interest. So I think we'll probably be speaking out of turn here, because we actually even haven't discussed it with my fellow executives yet. But I think we'll probably keep going forward with it and continue to develop it. But that's what it is to give people, and us as well, a mechanism for building an ongoing relationship rather than everything being a one-off engagement with the foundation. Did that make sense?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Let me ask you this. Like a lot of bond-related organizations, you were all had a curveball about a year ago when Amazon announced it was taking over creative control from Eon. How has that affected the foundation?
And to be honest, like I said earlier, it was sort of a blessing in disguise, because it was actually a real opportunity for us to sit down and go, okay, what does this mean for the foundation? What does it mean for the future of Bond? This is actually our opportunity to refocus the foundation. Having your single source of what had become your single source of income disappear overnight really focuses the mind. So it was a good opportunity for us to sit down and say, okay, how are we going to address this going forward? How are we going to move the organization going forward in a way that we're not dependent? We'd become too dependent on Eon, that we're not dependent on Eon. We were always separate from them, but we always knew that if there was another bond in motion coming along, that we'd be involved and things like that. And when that stopped suddenly, it was a real good opportunity for us to say, okay, how can we really service the community? Bond people, as Ian Fleming people, how can we service that? How can we reach out to the people waiting for the next Bond movie, who are going to play the video games, who are going to read the novels? How can we become part of that environment going forward? So it was a bit of a blessing in disguise, if you like. It was the kick up the pants that we needed to really focus where we wanted to be as a foundation, how we could serve the community going forward.
And Was the end of Bond in Motion, was that a direct result of the takeover, or was it coming to an end anyway? Do you know?
I don't know 100%. When the takeover happened, we had we were at the Bond in Motion exhibit in Washington, D.C. That got extended for a few months, but certainly as that was wrapping up, a lot of the people at Eon Productions who'd been involved in that on the archivist side and so forth were actually no longer involved, or were sort of on the ramp out. So, I think it was a consequence of it. I'm not necessarily sure somebody sat down and said, that's it, we're going to stop Bond in Motion. I think it was just a consequence of, I'm sure it wasn't on Barbara and Michael's mind that, oh my God, if we accept this check, the Ian Fleming Foundation is going to, not have a Bond in Motion exhibit. I'm sure that didn't cross their mind for an instant. But I think it was just the unintended consequences of the transfer of the franchise rights.
But could we see a new Bond in Motion under Amazon, do you think?
That's a question for Amazon. So, yeah, we've had a couple of meetings with Amazon. That's not even been part of the conversation yet, because to be honest, they are focused on a lot of other things.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
If I can phrase the question this way, is what you're doing now essentially sustainability? How does the foundation proceed? You've had a path for more than 30 years, but now it's time for change. How do we sustain this?
Actually, it's not. I think what we had was sustained ability. What we want to do is grow. We're very much on a path of growth. And I don't just mean in terms of revenue. Clearly, we want to do that like any business, but actually also in outreach. The programs we're doing, like I say, we're looking at, we've launched the teen literacy grant this week. We've had discussions around how do we, if we can build up a big enough endowment fund. And at the end of the day, that's what we want to do, is build up a big enough endowment fund that we can then do other programs and reach out to other communities. We've already started thinking about, what other Bond and Fleming communities around the US could we be impacting? There's, Las Vegas, Fort Knox, a whole bunch of other places that we may be able to help the communities in those as well. So we've done a 3-year strategic plan of where we want to be, and we're very much on track for that. And it is very much one of growth. I think what we had before, with all due respect to the guys before, was at a level of stability and stagnation. But I think now we've got this very clear vision of where we want to go and what we're going to do. And part of that is doing outreach like this.
If I can tell a quick anecdote, and I've mentioned this in the past on this podcast, but as it relates to the foundation, 2002, while I was working at Bloomberg News, I did a story about how Ford Motor was getting back into the Bond business. I'd been away from the series for several years, and they signed this big deal for Die Another Day. And when the story was in editing, an editor of mine said, Fleming Foundation, is that a real foundation? And I said, well, yeah, they say it is. Well, no, check it out. So I had to go back to one of the people I interviewed. Yes, it is a foundation. It had all the paperwork. But, I had to do that just to get sign off for the story. So that's a kind of anecdote about how the Ian Fleming Foundation didn't necessarily have the biggest public profile, I think.
That's fair. I mean, it was something you either knew about or, and it was a small percentage. I'll say it was a small percentage of Bond fans who knew. I just did one of David Zaritsky's Gatherall events, which, very high profile Bond guy. And there was, he was very nicely did an interview a bit like this, did an interview with me on the sort of Saturday evening. There was probably 50, 60 people in the room. And before I said, how many people have, beside me, have heard of the Ian Fleming Foundation? And maybe 2 hands went up.
Wow.
So by the end of it, it was 60 hands. But yeah, that's part of why we've got to get out there and act like a real foundation, act like a real corporate entity, do this sort of outreach, do the philanthropy. And like I said, we're still working on rebuilding and setting up a lot of the operational stuff that hopefully, at some point in somebody's putting a story together, their editor just either knows about us or does a quick Google search and it's like, okay, fine. So we want to make sure that we're getting out there and letting people know that we exist, what our aims are, and how we're going to go do it.
Well, for our listeners, the 007 Files does have a channel on YouTube. Most of the episodes are audio of it's just another way to get the podcast out. But we do some videos. Javi did one about Omega watches, and I did one like 6 minutes about my visit to the
yes, thank you very much. That was fun.
Foundation. So, and while I was there, I shouldn't plug a competitor, I guess, but David Zariski of the Bond Experience was doing his own video. So, like, we didn't exactly trip over each other. Like, I talked to him for like 2 minutes, but like, I know he's going to have some videos in the near future. Don't know when. Anyway, just word is getting out. I will just say that.
Well, that's good to know. It makes the hard work worthwhile when we actually start to get feedback and see things like that on video, and your video and a few others. Our social media stuff presence has climbed quite a bit in the last 3 months or so, and it's continuing to do so. So I appreciate it. Appreciate the invite to come on the 007 Files too and talk about the Foundation. As you can tell, I'm very passionate about it. I'll talk about it all afternoon if you give me the chance.
David, Javi, you have anything else to say?
Yeah, I just want to switch gears briefly away from the Foundation and onto your writing career.
Sure.
I think it was 2008 that the History of the Illustrated 007 came out, which is where I first met you. Have there been any talks or plans to update that? Because there's been a lot of James Bond comics from Dynamite in that time. Is there an expanded edition in the works?
How can I put this? The publisher I did that for, I also did a book on Star Trek comics, the history of Star Trek comics. He called me end of last year and said, do you want to do an update and expanded edition of the Star Trek book for the 60th anniversary? And if you think there's been a lot of Bond comics come out, this and doesn't compare to the amount of Star Trek comics.
Yeah.
And like an idiot, I said, yeah, that'd be cool. So my wife and I have just spent the last 3 months reading 551 Star Trek comics, not that we counted. We've sort of basically said, depends on how, if the Star Trek book goes well, then maybe we'll revisit the Bond one. But no guarantee. But yeah, the book was, one of those things, hey, there's not been any Bond, I think I've rounded out the book with, there hasn't been any Bond comics for 10 years. Something needs to happen. And then, of course, 3 months after the book comes out, they announced the Dynamite deal. But the Dynamite deal, I think, was for 10 years, so or a little bit longer. So,
well, they announced a new series by Gail Simone, and
nothing. But I know they were hit by the Diamond distributors bankruptcy. They and a lot of the other smaller publishers are hurting for money because of that. So I don't know if that's part of it.
Did you like that era?
What, the Dynamite?
Uh-huh.
Like anything, there was good and bad. There's some of them I really enjoy. I will say generally, I've said this to a lot of people, and it might upset a few people. I actually think that some of the Dynamite comics were the best contemporary Bond adventures done over the last decade or so. I think they were better than some of the movies. Some of them were a perfect example of how to do a contemporary Bond story that worked better than some of the Daniel Craig movies. Sorry, folks, if you're a big Daniel Craig fan.
Controversial view there.
Not all of them, but some of them. I think there were some particular standouts that really worked very well. So,
yeah.
All right, I'm going to put a pin in it. Javi, David, thanks for joining me. Alan, thank you especially for coming in. And this took a while to set up for weather reasons and other things we won't get into.
Logistic reasons, yeah. But thank you for the invite, Bill, and David and Javi. I really appreciate it.
Great having you on board.
Okay, and this is Bill Koenig speaking on behalf of David Lee and Javi Trillo and Alan Porter. Thank you for listening to us, and the 007 Files will be back soon. Take care.